Welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to go over two different ways that I've played with setting up my home lab environment. So this is going to be a home lab / automation update. I'm a little sick. If you can't tell, I did some IRL stuff, came back, got a little sick. So if I cough or sound like crap, that's probably why it is, but the video's got to come out. And I'm excited to share this stuff with you. So we're going to go over two different ways. The one way is going to be how I set up stuff in proxmox with proxmox as the main OS, like we talked about in the last video, how we use LXC containers to make Kubernetes pods or Kubernetes nodes and spin up Kubernetes locally. And the other one is going to be Docker and Docker Swarm. And I'm going to talk about like which one I kind of chose to move forward so far, why I made that decision, and leave you with instructions for both. I'm going to post both set of instructions like words on my blog. That way, if you want to follow the Word version or do the video and the Word version, they're both there, and you can do that. So the first one is going to be the Docker one. So if this is the Kubernetes one, is the Docker one. Okay, so let's make this large, if I can, hopefully. Oh my, there we go. Is large. Now, it looks confusing. I promise it's not. Okay, so that's actually what I have running right now in my environment. You can see these ones running. This one is not a Docker container. This one is Heimdall, which is my dashboard like this, which we'll go into later. But these three are Docker containers. And I'm going to go over how I got those to run Docker Swarm. So what Docker Swarm is you can take a bunch of nodes, just like Kubernetes, and you can swarm them together. That way they act as one, basically one node. So you can put stacks, which is basically just Docker Compose services on them. You can put normal containers on them, just like you normally would, and it will handle putting them on all the different nodes to make sure you're utilizing all the space on any of the nodes that you swarm together. So how that will look is I have 1, 2, 3 here, and they're pretty big, but what you can do to start, like it says up here, is there's this page right here, which has a bunch of helper scripts for proxmox. One of these, if you go to Docker and Kubernetes, is the Docker LX container right here. These are basically the steps we follow, or the step, because I didn't use the Alpine one. This is the step I followed to get the actual containers on the box, right? So the first thing you have to do is, just like it says here, you run this bash command. It will actually spin up. You select your settings. It has the default settings, but I think you're allowed to change them. Or you can just change them after the LXC container is open and running or logged into proxmox, and you can change those later. But what it will do is it will just basically spin one of these up for you right on your proxmox thing here. Now you can tell I changed a few things, but that's okay. So what it will do is it will spin one up for you. And then right here, this is a really important step, is during the install, it will ask if you want to install Portainer or its agent. If you want to swarm nodes together, don't install Portainer or the agent onto the LXC container. I do have Portainer running, but you have to do Portainer on the side as a stack install after you've swarmed the nodes together. If you put Portainer on one of the nodes, it will act like it sees the whole swarm, but it actually won't network properly. And it's weird why, and I really don't have an answer why. I'm just telling you it won't work. At least it didn't work for me. So don't do that unless you're going to do it all the way at the end, and you can install Portainer as a stack, which is basically just a Docker Compose that you can get right from the Portainer website. So the next step after you install it is you actually have to configure the proxmox node, which is actually my server, to be able to run swarm networking between the LXC containers, because technically an LXC container is not a whole VM. All of these containers are sharing a kernel. They don't all have their own kernel. So you have to do a little bit of stuff and a little bit of configuration to get those all network and work properly with Docker Swarm. Again, sorry. We're going to take a little drink break. Okay. This is what needs to happen. So for example, if I go to Batman, I've already done all these things, obviously, but if I go over to Batman, and you have to edit this file here, this com file. So if I do that and I edit that, you'll see that I added these things in. So I pasted the comments in there too and everything, so I know why they're there. but I pasted those in. And then down here, there's another file here, and there's going to be a line here that says that you basically just have to set to 1. I think you just actually have to uncomment it, but it'll be in there. This will also matter if you're doing Kubernetes with LXC, and we'll go over that. So this will happen either way. Then you can reboot the actual server itself. Again, these don't necessarily even need to be running yet after you install them using the helper script. You have to change the configuration and then reboot. And then what you can do is, let's say you installed one. Like, let's say I only installed this 100 one here. What I can do is I can actually just clone this. One thing I would recommend doing, like I did with this node template, which will be for Kubernetes that we're going to talk about later, but what you can do too, if I wanted to, is I could take one of these and you can convert it into a template. And then that way you can clone directly from the template. It takes less space on the server and it's a little easier to clone from, but you can still clone directly from this too. Just make sure if you do clone, you're doing a full clone. That way you get totally separate disks, totally separate everything. Again, the LXC containers still share the kernel, but you want the full clone. That way they work and they get their own machine IDs and everything else, so the server doesn't think they're all the same container. So that's how you can get a bunch of them. So basically this one, and this one are very similar. The only one is this 100 one here is the master of my swarm. So I don't deploy containers on it. Similar to like the master of a Kubernetes cluster. A lot of people don't deploy to, that way it doesn't get overloaded. And the Kubernetes API is always available. So if you'll notice, this one only has like 2 gigs of memory and the disk is only like a 4 gig disk. Right? Where some of these have like 100 gigs and like 12 gigs of memory. So like these are like much chunkier worker nodes, right? So here, these are my like 2 worker nodes basically. And then this one is like the master, the manager of the swarm. So that's the only reason why they're different. I just resized the other 2. Other than that, they're configured the same. So from here, then you can go in and follow the Docker Swarm docs. And from there, you can basically just Docker Swarm init on one. It will turn that into your manager automatically and give you basically just a copy paste command. That you can then copy to the other worker nodes and you can join the swarm as a worker. As long as obviously they're all on the same network, which they are. I will link those docs down below so you can follow those steps. But it's like 3 commands. You init on the manager and then add all the workers and you're good to go. From there, you can install Portainer if you want to. I like using Portainer. That's totally optional. So with the Portainer install, why I like it is, again, because you can install it on your Portainer instance, and you will then be able to see the swarm like this. So I can see my stacks and services running on it. I apparently have 2 that are dead, and volumes, the RAM, the nodes, the CPU, all that stuff. I can live connect to it and see which ones are exited. So I can see some of my NAT stuff is exited, some of my dgraph stuff is exited. But it looks like it did come back up as a new container. Same thing with some of the NAT stack stuff. It looks like it did come up as a new container. So I'm assuming these will be deleted soon with my services running. But anyway, you can see everything and manage everything using Portainer. You can use like some of your swarm stuff and you can deploy services or stacks or containers. You can manage your networks, all that stuff from Portainer. So it's basically like a GUI for Docker management. So I like having it, but this part is totally optional. So this is pretty much the setup for Docker that I have. For Kubernetes, it's almost the same thing, but a little bit different. Sorry, we're going to make it through it. So same thing is I'm using LXC containers because they take way less space, but they do share a kernel. So you need a little bit of magic to get it to work. So going back to proxmox, it's the same thing. If I go to my Batman node here on the shell, it's that same file we had before, right? I'm not going to nano it though, or I'm not going to vim it though, because nano is life, you know? But if you nano it, same thing. Right here is what I'm talking about. It's these 2 lines right here. Right here you can see I made it a 1 here, and I just had to uncomment that, but then the vm.swappiness equals 0, you actually have to type in. So that's where it's right under that. You add this, because swap cannot be on specifically for Kubernetes. So you save that and exit, and then this next step, the swap off -a, goes right here in the terminal. Again, I already did all this, so I don't have to do it again. But you basically, then you have to edit your fstab just like this. It's the same thing. So if you see here, the dev PVE root extension 4 right here, then it looks the same, and then the proc defaults down there. Those two lines, and then you're commenting out the swap again, right? Do this on all of your nodes that you're running on, and then reboot. You reboot the whole system. After that, these are all the steps that you would go through to make a specific container. So you would just actually create a new right here, just like this. And you go through all your steps here. So again, you name it something, and you give it an SSH key if you want. You go through in the memory and set whatever you want. But the important thing here is the swap memory here has to be 0. You disabled swap, and you want the swap to be 0. Also enable nesting. You can either do it in this menu while you're going through right here, or you can also disable it, or you can enable it after as well. Again, I also make mine all privileged containers just because, again, there is a way to do it unprivileged, but it just works miles better to just make them all privileged containers, whether it's Docker or Kubernetes. We're so close. My cold is fighting me. Then, and only then, after you make the container, do not start it. Instead, you want to go to this place here on your box and edit the configuration file for that container. So if you see, like, I have a container 100 here, it would be, if that was the name of my Kubernetes container, that ID would be 100 here. So again, I already have my stuff templated, but this 8000 node here, and that has all this stuff you can see right here. So I added it right here at the end. Unconfined, this A, the LX drop cap, all that stuff, right? And then same thing, you would then turn on the LXC container and create an etc rc.local file that contains this information right here, give it the proper permissions, and reboot. Whoop, that doesn't need to be there anymore. We made that a separate one. After you reboot, your node is then ready. Again, I made my Kubernetes nodes, or I made that first one on each box, I made it a template. So now if I want another Kubernetes node that's an LXC container, I don't have to follow all these steps again. My nodes are already configured for what I want them to be, so I can literally just go here, clone. Instead of a link clone, I want a full clone, and I should just name it something, blah node. It will normally just increment up, but you can choose whatever ID you want as long as it's not one that's taken. But it gives me 104 here because I haven't taken it yet. Again, if you have resource pools, you can put it in one. I don't do resource pools. And then you would just clone, and it'll just spit me out a new node that's already configured with all these steps. And you can just make a bunch of nodes after you template it. And to template it, once you have the LXC container running, boom, convert to template. And that's how you would make a template. So really, for either Docker or Kubernetes, all you're doing is configuring one LXC container, following these steps, and then you just convert to template, and you'll see it because its icon will change here like this. I normally change whatever I'm going to turn into a template. I normally make the ID a little bit like higher, just so there's a very obvious difference more than the icon. And then you can clone right from here. And you can just clone, and go from there, right? If you have multiple nodes, you can clone, convert it to another template, and then do this migrate thing and migrate it over to this node. So then this Robin node also has a template too, and it's the same template. So if I ever need, if I suddenly need 10 Kubernetes nodes, I can just clone 5 here, clone 5 here, clone 4 here, and 6 here, or whatever, but I have the templates to do it, and I don't have to do these steps 10 times. Same thing with the Docker. You can make one Docker LXC container, like I did. That's why they're all named Docker, because I ended up just cloning them. And then with the worker nodes, I just bumped up the memory and stuff after. But with that, then, you can do anything you want. So for instance, you can put Rancher on there, you can put services on there, you can start doing Helm installs on it, and you'll have a full Kubernetes environment. Now, I obviously picked the Docker install. The reason why I did that is only because I have 2 little B-Link servers. I don't have a huge, if you look at my data center here and you look at the summary, right? I have 30 usable gigs of storage total across both the servers that I have downstairs and 8 CPU cores. I really don't have a whole bunch, to be honest. right now at least. Now, if all these numbers were triple, I would be running on Kubernetes, but they're not. So for me, running LXC Docker containers, swarming them together, and just deploying Docker containers works for right now for me. I'm starting on Docker and I'm getting all my services running together with the idea that I will migrate back to Kubernetes. So Kubernetes runs. You can install K3s. That's going to be another video. Once I have these nodes, I have a fully automated Ansible script that you can literally just hand the IP of these nodes that you make, and it will just fully install a workable version of K3s. You migrate the kube config onto your local machine, and you can use kubectl on it right away. You can get right to work. It has an internal and external load balancer, and you're ready to go. That's going to be another video, but for now I'm using Docker. But I do have a full setup ready to go, and obviously I have node templates ready to go so that if I ever add to this, which is the plan, then I will be able to swap over to Kubernetes. But for right now, when I tried doing it on Kubernetes, I couldn't install as many services as I wanted to without already maxing out a bunch of memory. Because if I'm going to do Kubernetes, then I want to do it right. Whereas Docker, it's very easy to just deploy Docker containers, and they're much more lightweight. So that's why I'm going with Docker right now. But thanks for sticking through with the sickness. There's a lot more to come. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I'm going to release both of these steps on my blog so that you can read through it too. And then I'll probably just link the YouTube videos on the blog post too, so you can just pull the one page up and get both. But let me know if you have any questions on Twitter or on Discord or anything like that. The next videos are going to be talking about some of the services I'm already using in my new automation model, as well as, again, I will make a video on how you can take those 2 Kubernetes templates and fully spin up a working version of K3s with an internal external load balancer and a kubevip and everything else. So you just have a highly available cluster with one IP that you can use kube control on, and that basically works like the same thing you would get out of like EKS or anything else in the cloud. So stay tuned for that. 2 more videos to come that I'm hoping to kick out here soon, assuming I can get through this sickness. And yeah, but for now,